If you're here and you're already a fan of the Stories with Traction podcast with Matt ZAUN, we have got a treat for you today. So I'm Claire Davis. I'm the CEO and founder of Traction Resume, and we help careerists tell their stories on paper so they can lead the careers that fulfill them. And Matt and I have been working together for about 4 years, and after producing so many episodes and really understanding how you must tell your story to achieve your goals, we finally decided to come together so that we can answer some of the frequently asked questions that the business leaders that Matt coaches and the career executives that I work with are always asking us. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy this 15-minute FAQ sprint as we walk through some of your most burning questions. Thanks for joining us.
Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt ZAUN. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode.
So Matt, how do you use humor?
This is a question that is really important for people to recognize, because I think potential humor is doing people a disservice because it's not coming across in the best way.
Oh, interesting.
So here is a best practice. Do not utilize a joke unless you have so many reps as a stand-up comedian where you know that joke is going to connect. I always recommend stay away from jokes, okay? Because the problem is if you share a joke, so let's say someone gets up at a staff meeting and they say, hey, I have a joke, and they want to kind of lessen the mood. Then they share the joke and it falls flat and there's crickets. They look like an idiot. One of the ways around this is to just simply share a story. So there are stories. So often, as you know, when I go into different cities, I'll do talks back to back to back, sometimes 2 and 3 talks a week. And what's amazing to me is on some weeks I will share a story and the audience will just erupt in laughter based on the way I looked or the way I paused. And then the very next day, I'll share the exact same story in the exact same manner, and no one even chuckles. Now, the beauty is I don't look like an idiot because they didn't know that there were laugh lines planted in that story. It just wasn't a story that audience found funny, but it was still a story that they might have related to, but in a different way. So one of the most powerful ways around this is you can share a story, and maybe you have the story written or you've practiced to try to draw out humor, but even if it falls flat, you don't need to worry about it. In addition, what's really important is to recognize different generations find things funny. One of the dangers out there for a lot of leaders is they're sharing different things that might come across as offensive. I know personally, if I share a story to my 9-year-old son, and I could share the same story to a 75-year-old person, they both get it, they both find it funny, they both connect with it. That is a golden story that I can utilize because it goes through different generations. That's important. So it's really important to recognize, just share a story. If you're going to try to make it funny, have different pauses, or maybe you look a certain way, but you don't need to worry if it falls flat.
I don't consider myself a very funny person. I really never have. I mean, I love to have fun and keep light with people, but someone proposed this to me not too long ago, maybe a few years ago, that things that are really funny, it's not always the slapstick and the stand-up that we think about. It's that you and that person can relate on something that's so specific that most people can't, that it is kind of funny or like surprising. And it reminds me of my days when I was working in the OR. And one of the things that if you're in the OR and you are a rep, I mean, you are the ultimate picture of minding your P's and Q's in that situation, because there's a patient there, the focus is on that patient. And I remember how important it was as a newbie rep, 1, to make sure you signed in at the rep desk kiosk, and 2, at no time to touch the blue drapes. And I remember talking to somebody about that, and the drapes I'm talking about are the blue drapes that they cover the tables where then they're going to place the tools. And I spoke to a guy about this, and I was like, oh God, I remember. Yeah, I almost touched that blue drape. And he cracked up. And it wasn't because I was telling a joke. It was just because he and I could connect on something so very specific that it ended up being kind of funny.
It's almost like an inside joke type dynamic, but through a story.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So let's talk about storytelling when it comes to mission and vision. Because I think that, I've heard you talk about this before, where it's really not about that motivational poster on the wall, or even often the mission statement on the company website. So can you tell us and walk us through how companies can better tell stories to really convey the mission and vision in the right way?
Sure. So people need to recognize that if they're in a leadership position, different words are different to other people. So we think in pictures, and different words that we say paint different pictures in people's minds. This is so important to recognize, because there's a lot of leaders out there, they have this incredible vision and they tout the vision, but it might not be connecting with their team. So as an example, ownership is different to the leaders of an organization versus the employees. So when C-suite, or when an owner hears the word ownership, they think go, go, go mentality, they think grit. When an employee hears the word ownership, they think I need to work longer hours for less pay. So if they have the vision built with verbiage that they relate to the most, it's not going to land with their team members. So they need to make sure, what is the why of their team members, and how do you take the vision that the organization has and connect it to that why?
Yeah. I was talking to a client not too long ago, and after we write their resume, a lot of them say, hey, well, what else can I do to really further my career by using these other mediums? So in this case, he was asking me about making a leadership video. And he gave me an example of one that he saw from a leader, a general manager at one of the big 4 medtech companies. And listen, I am the first one to tell anyone, it is not easy to be on video. It's always nerve-wracking before you start, and eventually it becomes a muscle that you build. So kudos to this man for creating this leadership video in the first place. But what happened was, the video ended up being this laundry list of terms, that courage, grit, I believe in team leadership, but there was no heart to it. And so I think that's something else that I really come to value about mission statements, when they include the story and an example of how those things actually played out, because it goes from that 2D version of what's up on a poster on a wall to something people can actually gravitate to and really relate to.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that. And also something came to my mind that's really important too, is you had mentioned someone heard someone and then tried to craft it based on that.
Yeah.
That can also be dangerous in the sense that even if something is culturally acceptable, or if it's going viral on a social media platform, doesn't necessarily mean that you as a leader should be addressing it and sharing stories surrounding it. I was actually working with a client where this individual was sharing stories that was very culturally acceptable and was like very pertinent to the moment. But once we dissected who this person's audience was, it was having the complete reverse effect. It was not connecting with that specific audience. So again, the story was great, and what was being shared, it sounded fantastic. It was the wrong audience though.
Oh,
that's why they weren't closing the sales that they wanted.
So, there's a lot of reasons to talk about storytelling and ways that it can motivate employees. What are some specific ways that you have taught business leaders and their companies to motivate employees with storytelling?
So this goes back to the whole hero perspective, right? Not being the hero of our own story, but heaping praise on someone else. as a leader, they would be heaping praise on a specific team member. By doing that, they are edifying that person and they're saying, be like this, right? If one of the values is integrity, and Sarah, a team member, had an incredible amount of integrity when it came to a specific story, and you're talking about Sarah at the team meeting, you're pointing to Sarah and saying, this is what we mean by having integrity. If John had this incredible story where he put the customer first and you are edifying John, you're showing the team, when we talk about putting the customer first, do what John did. So you're motivating the employees based on their seeing examples, not just words on a board, not just someone saying, hey, we need to put the customer first, because I feel like every company says that.
Yeah.
What does that mean? You're going to paint the picture through storytelling and utilize team members to do it.
You know, I think right now we're in an interesting time where employees are not just vetting companies based on what am I going to make in this role and where's the opportunity for me to grow in my career. Now more than ever, I see people deeply invested in finding a culture that fits them as well with their company. So do you think that there are ways to leverage storytelling to really solidify or to make that culture known and felt?
Sure. Well, one of the goals is to create a company culture of storytelling. And based on who the team is, you're sharing stories that are relatable to that team. And that's where the culture comes into play, because if someone says that they have like a fun, playful type culture, the stories that are going to be shared are going to fit within that specific narrative. So it's important to recognize that. And leaders do this all the time. It's based on the vision and mission and values. They just tout these different words that are meaningless. If you truly say you're a team of flexibility, share stories that talk about flexibility, right? You're building that culture around what you say the organization's about.
It reminds me a lot of some of the startup companies that I was visiting a while ago between jobs in San Francisco. And I went to these 3 companies and they were major game app development companies. And the cool thing for these huge companies was to basically make the office another version of an adult playground. I mean, there was a slide from the 3rd floor all the way down. Every Friday night, they would open up the bottom floor so that they could let all the employees play the pinball games. But what I found was there was a big difference between the companies who would have those things, but they were gathering dust, and those that had those things and really encouraged their employees to connect by playing. And so I think it's really important that people live out their culture in this way. And certainly if you're sharing stories and telling actual accounts of where people are taking this to the mat at work, then that's going to be a huge difference and really exciting for somebody looking for a company like that.
For sure.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the finer points of delivering, because I know that you talk a lot about stage dynamics. You talk a lot about, what's the right kind of eye contact, what's the right cadence, and who we're focusing on. But what are some tips for delivering that great story?
So when it comes to delivery, there's many things. There's a laundry list of things that we could talk about, but there's some in particular that are the most pertinent people should recognize. So when it comes to an intro, one of the things that I utilize quite often is bringing the audience with me when it comes to an intro. Okay, so as an example, I have a story that it's a conversation with my grandfather, and I will say, if you would have been with me 14 years ago, sitting at my grandfather's table, you would have heard, dive into the story. People could use that frequently. They could basically pick a time to start and say, if you would have been with me when I was struggling in such and such job, you would have seen the horror on my face. And then you would have seen my incredible boss come up to me and mention something I've never heard before. You know what he told me? X, Y, and Z. You're diving into that story and then the change. So that's just something from an opening. If you would have been with me, it kind of gets the person right into the story. Another thing is voice fluctuation. So speaking through people. So basically, figuratively bringing someone on stage with you or with you to the conversation, and then vicariously speaking through them. This is also a way you could have massive voice fluctuation. You can actually yell at people vicariously through someone else. So as an example, if you would have been with me 13 years ago at my grandfather's table, you would have heard him say, "Matt, can you believe this?" So I'm shouting at the audience based on me sharing what my grandfather said.
Oh, wow.
So it's a way to have the voice fluctuation. Another thing to recognize is the importance of your body language. So hands are extremely important. Often people show the backs of their hands, which is one of the worst things that you can do in order to build trust. You've asked a few questions in different episodes regarding trust. One of the best ways to do it is to have palms out. Palms out is very inviting to the subconscious mind. It also shows that you're not a threat to someone. So it's built into our DNA. Is the person a threat to us? And this goes back like thousands of years as we were developing and we were going out and hunting and gathering and all these different things. Like, I know it sounds weird, but when someone stands up in front of an audience and their hands are behind their back, part of you are thinking, like, what is up with the hands? Now, we probably know they don't have a weapon in their hand, but we want the person to show us the palms of their hand. It's an element of trust building. So it's really important when people, especially if they have a clicker and they're utilizing like a slide deck, they're showing people the back of their hand. So it's really important at some point to show the palm.
Oh my gosh, Matt, every time I sit down with you and talk about storytelling, it's like a masterclass in storytelling. So I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to sit here with you in the same room in person and go through some of these things, because a lot of times we hear great advice online about, what stories to tell, and storytelling is really important. But is anybody really taking the time to just give you the how? And so I'm really grateful that you chose to come out here and to share this stuff with me. I think the series is amazing, and I can't thank you enough.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.